you grew up in Denmark? I know you went to university there. And that is interesting. There's a term, getting to Denmark, which means getting to a high-functioning society amongst the elites in the globe, like when they go to Davos and other places. I haven't been to Davos, but at other conversations with these globalist-type people, they're like, we have to get to Denmark, which is a really great compliment. It means what the people want is what they get in their government. When we look at America and how amazing we've performed on a capitalistic basis, but how poorly we've performed in government services, healthcare and education are a disaster here. We spend the most, we get the least. But on a capitalist basis, we have the giant companies that for a little 300 million person country are, taking over the globe. And we are the benefactors of that as a country. What do you think about that balance where our government's completely dysfunctional, we don't get what we need out of it, yet we spend all this money, but capitalism, unconstrained capitalism in America, I would call it, or very vibrant, less rules-based capitalism, let's call it, fluid capitalism, extreme capitalism, there's got to be a word for it. Extreme capitalism. Late stage, I think, is the insulting word for it because it kind of says like this is the end of the game.
Yes.
So late stage capitalism or extreme capitalism, I'll call it. Was it worth it or not worth it? Because we do, have Google and Facebook and Amazon and all these incredible services, Uber, Airbnb. We are the owners of those as a country, those companies, right? So was it worth it or not?
Well, first of all, we're not the owners. There's a small handful of people who are the owners, who get the benefits, the lion's share of the benefits of those companies. So positing as though, like, hey, this is a shared benefit to America is doing a disservice to all the people who this is not a benefit at all. In fact, they are the prey. If you look at companies like Facebook and Google, there's certainly people who benefit from it. And then there's certain people who are being exploited by it. And I think perhaps that's even more concrete when you look at the gig economy and you look at companies like Uber or DoorDash or any of these other atrocious companies who essentially have built their wealth off exploitation and violation of people and misclassifying them as contractors instead of workers. But let's put that aside and take the big picture first, which is sort of, is capitalism a good thing? This is one of those arguments that I always find so fascinating because in the context of you saying getting to Denmark, that's the goal, right? Denmark is a capitalist system. What are you talking about? They're free markets. They're free companies. They're not state-owned companies. Much of Western Europe has simply decided that there's certain parts of the economy, that certain parts of society that operate poorly under market economics. They are education and healthcare in particular. So if you look at most of Western Europe, and it's not just Denmark, although Denmark is perhaps really all of Scandinavia is a particularly well-functioning example of the government running healthcare, not paying for insurance, running. Like the doctors at the hospitals, they're employed by the government. The same thing is in the UK. And you take education, the universities in Denmark, they're not sort of private universities where the government kicks in on the debt scale. No, they're run by the government. And you know what? They're run really well. In fact, when I came from Denmark to here, I was astounded at just how poorly those two parts worked. When I came to the U.S., I had a girlfriend at the time who was enrolled in Loyola University. And first of all, the cost was just obscene. I think we were paying something like 30 or 35 grand a year for that. I forget the specifics.
Sounds about right.
When you come from a country like Denmark, where education is not only paid for by the government, there's a stipend for any student to cover basic living expenses.
Explain that, because that's mind-blowing to Americans. Explain how the stipend works. How much is it? How do you get it technically? Like,
it's not means tested. So if you are actually that's not entirely true. If you work, anyway, let me just go to the basics. Yeah. The basics is that you get about $1,000 a month to pay for your living expenses while you attend university. And you can do this for up to, I think, like 6 years or something, which a master's degree in Denmark is usually around 5 years, and then they allow you 1 year to essentially gap it. Most people don't necessarily finish their master's degree in 5 years. And then I think there's probably also an extension available if you pursue a PhD. The interesting part for me, though, where you can sort of say, how is this affordable? Is that in an American frame of mind, you think like, oh, is the government really paying like 30 or 40 or 50 grand a year for all these students? Of course they're not. The education system is incentivized to be efficient. My entire education at the Copenhagen Business School, I looked at this once, and I thought it was something like $18,000 for a 3-year bachelor's degree. Like that was what it cost the Danish state to produce that education. And you go like, well, that's obviously a lot less. I know there are some examples where in-state tuition and so on and so forth. But if you just say, what does it cost to educate anyone who wants a higher education and give them the stipend to allow them to live while they do so, what will it cost society? And the answer is a whole lot less than you would think, a whole lot less than what is spent on the American system, which is a system that's heavily gate-kept, right?
Yeah.
Where either you have to have these extreme grades and you almost have to prepare for college and kindergarten, or you have to be very wealthy. I mean, that's a broken system. And then on healthcare, it's the same thing. Denmark has great healthcare. Now, every society, even if they have great healthcare, have people who complain about that healthcare. That's just the nature of it, right? But if you look at the overall stats, life expectancy and all these basic things, Denmark does just way better than the U.S. And Denmark spends something, I think it's like 8% of GDP, and the U.S. spent 18% of GDP on healthcare.
So obvious
you go,
the system
here you have two of the most important functions of society, healthcare and education. The American system is a for-profit capitalist system that is just being whipped by state-funded and run systems. And you go like, do you know what? That should just give you some room for pause here, that maybe the capitalist system in all factors of the society is not the clear answer. That doesn't mean that we can't have for-profit companies producing phones. Yeah, that works great. Like, hey, get your phone on the free market. You're not that interested in the free market when you're about to die.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like when you do this hybrid of, because we do have Medicare and we have some state-sponsored things and we have some like,
and people love him.
Well, they do love him. Yeah, it's like they're fighting for it. That's how they make their decision on how to vote is for that. So it is even more.
Yes.
We just have to go one way or the other. I think it has to be completely capitalistic or it has to be, in a free market where customers are paying. But we've picked the worst of all worlds. To tie it to employment creates the most unhealthy dynamic. But I mean, I have people who can't work for some of the startups I've invested in because the healthcare is not good enough, or they can't leave a company that's hit scale because they can't get as good healthcare. So now you have employers dealing with employees who either don't want to go or don't want to leave, and it just creates this total dysfunction, right? Like in terms of like we were talking about before in the.
Isn't that ironic that here you have a market sort of approach that's essentially undermining the free market? It's undermining the free movement of labor. People can't change jobs. They can't do all these things. And what are we doing this for? For some sort of ideological obsession that the free market is the right answer for everything? It is so clearly not the right answer for healthcare. And I think failing to address that is creating some of those great frictions in American society and American politics. And I think hopefully we're finally getting to the point where people have just had enough. And of course they've had enough. You look at all the objective measures of medical bankruptcies or the outcome of the medical system, and you go like, this shit is broken. And I say that as someone who's very rich, in sort of comparison to
the average
the standard, and I can afford any kind of healthcare I want, and I've gotten any kind of healthcare I've wanted, and the system is still completely insane. I go in to get some sort of checkup. I have to fill out more papers than, I don't know, applying for a driver's license in the Soviet Union would have required, right? You go like, the system is baroquely bureaucratic. And just the whole wrestling of everything with insurances and so on, it is just bust. Like on all objective factors, the system is just bust, and it needs to be replaced.